Hello guys, welcome back. It's Lewpac here with a build spotlight video for you for Albion Online. And today we're going to be taking a look at a build that is affectionately known in the community as the Cancer Tank. Now, despite the name, a lot of people have been very vocal about this build since it cropped up, saying it's absolutely ruining the meta and it's anti-fun and all sorts. But I thought, with all of the controversy and all of the focus on this build, we really should take a look at it. Now, the origins of this build are, it first cropped up in GVGs with a guy called Delicious Milk GG, a buddy of mine playing it. He's actually a very good theory crafter and build concept creator for this game, but this build actually was apparently created by a former League of Legends pro player called Zuma, who dips in and out of the game. Nonetheless, it is starting to appear in many different compositions, and it features prominently in the meta right now. Now, before we take a look at the build, we'll talk about the compositions that are using it. This, although it is a plate tanky build, this is generally used as the second tank in a 5-man comp. Yes, you heard me right. 2 tanks in a single 5-man squad. And the reason for this is because it can actually do quite a lot of damage despite being a tank. So we're going to go over the abilities of this tank and the build first, and then we'll talk about why it works so well together. So firstly, in the helmet slot, we have the Judicator's helmet running electrical discharge, and I'm running the CC Authority passive. For the chest piece, it's the Soldier's Armor with the Fury, which gives you bonus damage every time you're hit, up to 10% 10 times, or 100% bonus damage and bonus crowd control. Using the Cultist Sandals Rotten Ground, which does damage and actually prevents healing going through by 20% for your target or anybody inside it. Actually using the Aggression passive here. For the weapon, it uses the one-hand mace from the mace line. I've heard a lot of people talk between all 3 of these. Defensive Slam gives you a defensive buff when you attack somebody with it. Threatening Strike is the highest damage of the 3 attacks, and Stalling Slam is the lowest damage but drains their energy. So all 3 can actually be used depending on the situation, but everybody's running Snare Charge, and of course you have Silencing Strike as your ultimate, which is a very long single target silence, which also purges the enemy. Energetic is one option to use if you're running Defensive Slam on it, but if you're running Stalling Slam, you'll actually be draining energy out of your opponent, so you can probably be a little bit more greedy with the build and take something like Stunning Strike, Life Leech, or possibly even Dreadladen Phaeton if you're very good at keeping an eye on the buffs. So what is this build and why is it so good? Well, this is the secondary tank build. It isn't the main tank of the composition, it's a secondary, and the whole concept of this build is good CC, reasonable damage pressure, and then a big single target lockdown. So you can see here we've got the normal defensive slam, which will give us a little defensive bonus when we attack. We also have 3 crowd control abilities. We have this Snare Charge where we can leap onto the opposition and root them, and you can actually see that that route is quite long. We have the single target ultimate for the silence. Again, you can see the silence lasts quite a long time, and we have the Electric Discharge, which is a nice short stun but a massive AoE. Although please note the Electric Discharge is getting a slight nerf in the upcoming balance, it looks like. Having looked at the NDA, it seems like it's going to get a radius reduction and duration. We then have the Rotten Ground, which does damage over time, does extra damage if they leave the Rotten Ground. It does 4 more ticks after they leave, as you can see. It's actually quite powerful, even in its base form. The reason we haven't talked about Fury yet is because we're going to get to that in just a second, and it is the center of the whole build. For the potion slot, it's such an offensive build that people are running major poison potions to do damage and just weaken the targets and make them easier to kill. And Deadwater Eel Stew, which gives you cooldown reduction and damage. In the offhand slot, because it's a one-handed mace, it's the Mistcaller. Even more cooldown reduction. So the whole point of this build is it syncs together to create incredible lockdown on a team. Usually when you use crowd control abilities, if a player gets hit by the same crowd control ability more than once in a short space of time, it gets affected by what's called diminishing returns. So for example, if a hammer tank stuns a player and then somebody else uses a Royal Helmet Keg on the player and then somebody else uses stun run on the player, each stun will be shorter than the last because they diminish. The reason this build is so powerful is because it runs 3 different CCs. So we're running Snare Charge, which is a root. We're running Silencing Strike, which is a silence, and Electric Discharge is a stun. So these are 3 different types of CC that don't diminish each other. That's why this build is so powerful. And on top of this, the thing that brings this whole build together and makes it absolutely insane is Fury. So Fury gives you bonus damage and bonus crowd control generation. And what you're going to find with that is it makes all of your CCs absolutely incredible and makes Rotten Ground and your Poison Potion even do insane amounts of damage. So what I'm going to do here is ask my buddy to come and beat me up a little bit. And he's going to charge up my my armor here. And you're going to see now, if I root him, if I silence him, and I stun him, you're going to see how long that silence lasts and how long that root lasted post Fury. And that really, really ramps up. In the middle of a fight, it ramps up the damage and just causes this tank to wreak havoc. If he isn't stunning the entire enemy team from the backline with his helmet, he's putting pressure on the clothies with the Rotten Ground. I've seen tanks using this build solo an enemy clothy, even the enemy healer, because he's silenced for so long. It's absolutely phenomenal to see, and it is a really cool build. Now, of course, everything based around the soldier's armor does mean you're slightly vulnerable to purge, but with the cooldown reduction food and the Mistcaller, your Fury will come up well before the purge does. And on top of that, if we look at the basic skills again, decent stun duration and crowd control duration, even without the Fury. The Fury is just the icing on the cake of this build. Now, this character we're looking at is my alternate character, my first alt. He was always my tank. He's been running Hammer Tank for ages, and since this build was created, I basically just took, I think I took 150 or 160 tomes. I already had maces at tier 6, but no spec. I literally equipped this build, ate 160 tomes, and went into a GVG. And of course, no build spotlight video would be complete with a little bit of action. So, here is a recent PvP GVG battle using this tank build. In fact, this is the first time I've ever played this build. Now, a lot of the reasons people are calling this an anti-fun build around the community is because the absolute devastating amount of CC and the duration of that CC when it is charged up by the soldier's armor, combined with the fact that people feel that a plate user, a tank in quotation marks, should never be able to solo a clothy in the back line during a GVG. You know, the tank's role is usually to disrupt, and this is a lot of CC, which you would expect from a tank, probably, but the fact that they can kick out so much damage while CCing huge amounts of players with that absolutely outrageous sized root, a massive AoE stun on the helmet, and of course that long duration silence and purge ability on the one-handed mace ultimate. I mean, if you only have one cleanse, if you don't cleanse the root or roll away from the root, you're going to eat the next CC. If you don't cleanse the stun, okay, you've saved it for the silence, but there's every possibility that you're out of position and dead before you can even cleanse the silence. It's incredible, not to mention, obviously, many other people on your team are going to be rooted and stunned at the same time, and possibly all begging for cleanses. It's just so much CC coming out of one player who can almost also deal lethal damage to the squishies. So I'd be interested to know what the community feels about this build. Is it actually a plague on the game right now. Is it going to go anytime soon? And what do you think of the counters? Feel free to comment below if you want to chip in on the debate. Another thing to note about this build that I found out when equipping it is actually that it's not too bad for PvE farming as well. I did some awesome AoE PvE farming on open world mobs with it, using that Fury, that Rotten Ground, and actually switching out Snare Charge for the Heavy Slam in order to get the mobs down. But it's not too bad for fame farming. So if you are thinking of trying this build out, it's not too difficult to fame up, because it can hold its own in solo situations, and it's probably quite welcome in group compositions, because you can use air compressor to pull everything in, you can stun them with your electric discharge, and you can actually put out some damage with your Rotten Ground. Hope you guys have enjoyed this build focus, guys. Tune in for more coming soon to the channel. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe below, and comment if there's any other specific builds you would like me to look at. Thank you for watching.